There's a specific kind of exhaustion nobody talks about. It's not the exhaustion of working too hard. It's not burnout from doing too much. It's the exhaustion of knowing yourself so well that you become your own prison. You know why you do what you do. You've read the books. You've probably sat across from a therapist and named your patterns out loud. You can trace the wound. You understand the cycle. And somehow, none of that has moved you an inch. That's not a failure of intelligence. That's something else entirely. And if you've ever caught yourself thinking, I know exactly what I'm doing wrong, and I still can't stop, this video is going to feel uncomfortably familiar. Because what nobody tells you about self-awareness is that it has a shadow side. And the smarter you are, the harder it is to see it. Let me tell you something that took me a long time to understand. Self-awareness was supposed to be the answer. That's what we were told. Know yourself, understand your patterns, identify your triggers, trace everything back to the root. And once you do that, once you really see yourself clearly, change becomes possible. That's the promise. And for a while, it feels true. The first time you connect a current behavior to something that happened years ago, there's this feeling of relief, like finally the puzzle makes sense, like finally you have the key. But here's what nobody warns you about. That key doesn't always open a door. Sometimes it just gives you a more sophisticated way to stay exactly where you are. Think about the people you know, maybe you're one of them, who have spent years in therapy, years journaling, years reading, years reflecting. They can tell you exactly why they avoid commitment, exactly why they self-sabotage before something good happens, exactly why they shut down when they feel vulnerable. The vocabulary is impressive, the insight is real, and yet the behavior hasn't changed. Not slightly changed, not mostly changed, hasn't changed. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern, and it's more common than anyone in the self-help world wants to admit. There's a term in psychology called intellectualization. It's a defense mechanism. It means using abstract thinking, analysis, and insight as a way to avoid actually feeling something, to avoid actually doing something. You take the raw, uncomfortable truth of your situation and you process it so thoroughly, so elegantly, that it loses its power to move you. You've turned pain into a concept, and concepts don't hurt enough to change you. Think about what that really means. Pain, in its raw form, is information. It tells you something is wrong. It creates pressure. It demands a response. But the moment you name it, frame it, and file it under the right psychological category, it becomes manageable. It becomes something you understand, rather than something you feel. And understanding, without feeling, is just a story you're telling yourself about your life instead of living it. This is what happens when self-awareness becomes a destination instead of a tool. You start collecting insights the way some people collect books they never read. The shelf looks impressive, the titles are serious, but nothing in you is different. And the cruel part, it feels like progress. Every new layer you uncover feels like growth. Every session where you cry and understand something feels like a breakthrough. You leave feeling lighter. You think something shifted, but then Monday comes, and you do the same thing you've always done, and you understand deeply and articulately exactly why. That loop, that exhausting, humiliating loop, has a name. Some therapists call it insight addiction. You become hooked on the feeling of understanding yourself. It releases something. There's a quiet satisfaction in finally making sense of your own chaos. And so you keep going back to that well. Not to change, but to understand more, to go deeper, to find the next layer. The problem is, the well has no bottom. There is always another layer, always another pattern beneath the pattern, always another wound beneath the wound. And if you're not careful, the search for understanding becomes its own form of avoidance. A very intelligent, very respectable form of staying still. Because somewhere along the way, for a lot of people, self-awareness stopped being the path out and became the walls of a very comfortable, very well-decorated cell. The question isn't whether you know yourself. You probably do. The question is what you've been doing with that knowledge, and whether knowing has quietly replaced doing in a way you haven't fully allowed yourself to see yet. There's a moment most people can point to. Not a dramatic moment necessarily, not a rock bottom or a crisis, just a quiet moment where something became clear. Maybe it was in the middle of a conversation where you heard yourself explaining, again, why you are the way you are, using all the right words, tracing it back to the right places. And somewhere in the middle of that explanation, a thought crossed your mind that you didn't say out loud. I've said all of this before, exactly like this. And nothing is different. That thought is important. Not because it means you failed, but because it's the first honest signal that the system you've been using isn't working the way you thought it was. Here's what that system looks like from the inside. You feel something uncomfortable. Anxiety before an important decision, resistance when you try to start something new, a familiar pull toward distraction exactly when focus matters most. And your trained mind immediately goes to work. Why is this happening? What does this connect to? What does this say about me? You analyze it, you contextualize it, you understand it, and then you do nothing. Or you do the same thing you always do. Because understanding the feeling was enough to release the pressure. The discomfort had just enough space to breathe that it stopped demanding action. And your nervous system, which is always looking for the path of least resistance, learned something. It learned that thinking about the problem feels almost as good as solving it. Neuroscientists call this a substitution behavior. Your brain is wired to seek resolution, closure, the feeling that something has been handled. And reflection, when it's thorough enough, tricks the brain into thinking resolution has happened. The loop closes in your mind before anything changes in your life. This is why highly intelligent people are often the most stuck. Not despite their intelligence, because of it. The more sophisticated your mind, the more convincing the internal narrative, the more airtight the explanation, the more the story you tell yourself about why change is complicated feels like wisdom rather than avoidance. A person with less self-awareness might just act, impulsively, messily, without fully understanding why. And sometimes that impulsive action changes everything. Not because it was the right move, but because it was a move. It created friction with reality. And friction with reality is the only thing that actually produces change. You, on the other hand, understand too well why that impulsive action might backfire. You've mapped the risks. You've seen the pattern. You know your history with this kind of thing. So you wait. You reflect a little more. You prepare. You get ready to get ready. And the months pass. There's a particular kind of person who spends a decade preparing for a life they never actually enter. They're not lazy. They're not afraid in the way people usually think of fear. They're over-informed about their own limitations. They've done so much internal work that taking an imperfect step forward feels irresponsible, like they should know better by now. Like someone with this level of self-knowledge shouldn't make rookie mistakes. But here's the thing about rookie mistakes. Everyone makes them. The only difference is whether you make them at 30 or at 50. Whether you make them while there's still time to course correct. Whether you make them while the window is open or spend so long analyzing the window that one day you look up and it's closed. That's not a metaphor. For a lot of people listening to this right now, that's a timeline. And the self-awareness that was supposed to protect you from wasted time has quietly become the reason for it. That realization is uncomfortable. It's supposed to be. Because discomfort, real discomfort, not processed and analyzed discomfort, is the only thing that's ever made any of us move. And yet, even now, as you're hearing this, part of your mind is already doing what it always does. It's categorizing this, filing it, finding the framework that explains why this applies to other people more than it applies to you. Finding the exception that makes your particular version of staying still feel different from what I just described. That reflex right there. That automatic move toward analysis instead of recognition. That's exactly what we're talking about. And the fact that it happened just now without you even choosing it, tells you more about where you are than anything else in this video will. Let's talk about identity, because this is where it gets really uncomfortable. At some point in the process of becoming self-aware, something shifts. What started as a tool becomes a label. What started as a practice becomes a personality. You stop being someone who is working through certain patterns and become someone who has those patterns. They become part of how you introduce yourself to yourself every morning. I'm someone who struggles with consistency. I'm someone who has abandonment wounds. I'm someone who tends to self-sabotage when things get good. I'm someone who overthinks everything. Notice how fluent that sounds. Notice how settled. There's no tension in those sentences, no friction. They've been repeated so many times, internally and sometimes out loud, that they've stopped feeling like observations and started feeling like facts. But they're not facts. They're stories. And the difference between a fact and a story is that a story can be rewritten. The problem is that identity is one of the most defended territories in the human psyche. Psychologists have known for decades that people will go to extraordinary lengths to behave consistently with who they believe themselves to be, not who they want to be, who they believe they already are. The brain experiences identity, threat, the same way it experiences physical danger. When something challenges your sense of self, the response is protective, automatic, and almost always invisible to you while it's happening. So here's what that means in practice. You've spent years building a detailed, nuanced, psychologically sophisticated picture of who you are. And that picture, as honest as it feels, has become a cage. Not because it's wrong necessarily, but because you've made it permanent. You've taken a snapshot of yourself at a particular moment in your life and decided it's a portrait. And now, every time you try to change, something in you resists. Not out of laziness, not out of fear in the simple sense, but because change would require you to be wrong about yourself. And being wrong about yourself, after all this work, after all this reflection, feels like losing something. It feels like the ground shifting. Think about the last time you genuinely surprised yourself. The last time you did something that didn't fit the story. Maybe you were more patient than you expected, more brave, more capable. And then, almost immediately, your mind rushed in to explain it away. That was an exception. That's not really me. That explanation is not humility. It's the psyche defending its architecture. Because a self-concept, even a painful one, provides predictability. And predictability, even when it's limiting, feels safer than the open, uncharted territory of not knowing who you might become. Here's a question worth sitting with. How much of what you call self-knowledge is actually self-definition? How much of the story you tell about yourself is description? And how much is prescription? How much of it tells you who you are, and how much of it, quietly, tells you who you're allowed to become? Because there's a version of self-awareness that liberates. It looks at a pattern and says, this is what I've been doing, and it's not who I have to be. It holds the insight lightly, uses it as a starting point, not a stopping point. And then there's a version that calcifies. It looks at the same pattern and says, this is who I am. It holds the insight like a verdict, mistakes familiarity for truth, confuses having mapped the territory with being trapped inside it. Most people who have been doing this work for a long time have, without realizing it, crossed from the first version into the second. The language of growth became the language of limitation. The vocabulary of healing became the vocabulary of permanent diagnosis. And the most disorienting part is that it happened through honesty, through genuine reflection, through real work, which is why it's so hard to see. Because you didn't get here by giving up. You got here by trying. And somewhere in all that trying, the map became the territory. The story became the sentence. The moment you realize that is not a defeat. It's the first real opening you've had in a long time. Because you can't rewrite a story you don't know you're telling. And now, blocco cinco. Expendido. There's a particular kind of conversation that happens between people who've done a lot of inner work. It sounds like honesty. It sounds like depth. But if you listen closely enough, you start to notice something strange. Nobody is actually saying anything new. They're exchanging insights they've already had, validating patterns they've already identified, going deeper into territory they've already mapped, and leaving the conversation feeling understood, feeling seen, feeling like something meaningful just happened. But nothing changed. No decision was made, no action was taken, no commitment was spoken out loud. Just two people who understand themselves very well, confirming to each other that understanding is enough. This is what a support system looks like when it quietly stops supporting growth and starts supporting stasis. And it happens in therapy too. It happens in close friendships. It happens inside your own head at 2 a.m. when you're having what feels like a breakthrough, but is actually just a very familiar spiral, wearing new clothes. The technical term for what's happening in those moments is rumination. Not reflection, rumination. The difference is direction. Reflection moves. It takes what you notice and asks, what do I do with this? Rumination circles. It takes what you notice and asks, what does this mean about me? And it keeps asking and asking until the original discomfort has been so thoroughly processed that it no longer has the energy to push you anywhere. And the insidious thing about rumination is that it feels productive. It feels like you're doing the work. It has the texture of honesty and the weight of seriousness. But it's motion without movement. It's effort without direction. And the longer you stay in it, the more natural it feels to stay. Here's where neuroscience becomes relevant in a way that's hard to dismiss. Every time you think a thought, you strengthen the neural pathway associated with it. This is basic Hebbian learning. Neurons that fire together wire together. Which means that every time you revisit a pattern, every time you retrace the same wound, every time you run the same internal analysis, you are literally making that pathway stronger. More automatic, more default. You think you're dismantling the pattern by examining it. But if examination is all you do, you're actually deepening it. You're paving the road you keep telling yourself you're going to stop walking down. This doesn't mean self-reflection is useless. It means reflection without behavioral output is, neurologically speaking, closer to practice than to healing. You are practicing the pattern. Getting better at it, more fluent, more automatic. All while believing you are working your way out of it. That's a hard thing to hear, especially if you've invested years in this process. Especially if therapy or journaling or meditation has felt like some of the most meaningful work of your life. And it may well have been meaningful. Meaning and effectiveness are not the same thing. You can have a profound insight and still not change. You can cry in a therapist's office and feel genuinely moved and walk out and make the same choice you've always made. You can write 10 pages in a journal about exactly why you do what you do and close the journal and do it again tomorrow. Not because you're broken, but because insight on its own doesn't reach the part of the brain that actually runs your behavior. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for self-reflection and analysis, is not the part that drives habitual behavior. That's the basal ganglia, the amygdala, the older, faster, deeper systems. And those systems don't learn through understanding. They learn through repetition, through experience, through doing something different enough times that the new behavior starts to feel more natural than the old one. Which means that at some point the thinking has to stop. Not permanently, not completely, but long enough to take a step, a real step. An imperfect, uncomfortable, potentially embarrassing step into something you don't fully understand yet. Because that step, that single moment of action without complete certainty, does more for you neurologically than 1,000 hours of knowing why you haven't taken it. Let's talk about the moment change actually happens. Because it doesn't look the way you think it does. Most people who've spent years in the self-awareness world have a very specific picture of what transformation is supposed to feel like. It's supposed to feel like clarity, like resolution, like the fog finally lifting, and the path becoming obvious. Like you've done enough work that the next step reveals itself naturally, without resistance, without doubt, without the usual noise. That picture is a fantasy, and it's one of the most effective traps in the entire landscape of personal development. Real change almost never feels like clarity. It feels like moving while confused. It feels like deciding before you're ready. It feels like acting without the full story, without the guarantee, without the version of yourself you were waiting to become before you started. The people who actually change, not the people who understand change deeply, but the people who actually do it, share one thing in common. At some point, they got tired of waiting for the feeling. They stopped requiring certainty before action. They made an imperfect move in an imperfect moment and let reality respond. That sounds simple. It isn't, because everything in your trained mind will tell you that moving without clarity is reckless, that you should know better, that someone who has done this much work shouldn't have to stumble forward blindly, that there must be a more intelligent way to do this. There isn't. Or rather, the intelligent way is exactly that, moving before you're ready. Because ready is a feeling, not a state. And that feeling, for people with high self-awareness, almost never comes. There's always one more thing to understand, one more layer to examine, one more reason to wait just a little longer. And while you're waiting, life is not waiting with you. The people around you are making messy, imperfect decisions and living with the consequences and learning from them in real time. They're accumulating experience while you're accumulating understanding. And experience, even painful experience, changes you in ways that understanding never will. Because experience leaves a mark on the body, not just the mind. It rewires you at the level where behavior actually lives. Think about the decisions in your life that actually moved you forward, the ones that changed your trajectory in some real and lasting way. How many of them were made from a place of complete clarity and zero doubt? How many of them felt, at the moment you made them, like the obviously right thing to do? Probably very few. Probably most of them felt risky, uncertain, slightly premature. And it was only in retrospect, looking back from where you ended up, that they made sense, that the logic became visible, that you could trace the line from that imperfect decision to where you are now. That's how it works. That's always been how it works. The clarity comes after the move, not before it. The understanding follows the action. The story makes sense in reverse. But when you're inside a mind that has been trained to understand first and act second, that sequence feels wrong. It feels irresponsible. It feels like bypassing the work, like you'd be acting from the same unconscious place you've been trying to move away from. Here's the distinction that matters. There's a difference between unconscious action and uncertain action. Unconscious action is running the old pattern without seeing it. Uncertain action is seeing clearly, understanding fully, and moving anyway, without waiting for the fear to disappear or the doubt to resolve. That second kind of action is not a failure of self-awareness. It's the graduation from it. It's what self-awareness was always supposed to produce. Not more reflection, not deeper understanding, not a more sophisticated map, a different move. And here's what that move does that nothing else can. It gives you new data, real data. Not the data of your imagination, not the worst-case scenario your mind has been rehearsing, but actual information about what happens when you act. About who you are when you're in motion, rather than in analysis. About what you're actually capable of when you stop consulting the story and start writing a new one. One different move. Made imperfectly. Made before you feel ready. Made in the full knowledge of your patterns and your history and your tendency to retreat, and made anyway. That's what breaks the loop. Not insight, not understanding, not another layer of knowing. The move itself. The imperfect, uncertain, slightly terrifying move that your most self-aware self has been postponing for longer than you want to admit. If you've made it this far into this video with me, I want to take a second to say something directly. Most people don't make it here. They click away in the first few minutes. Not because the content wasn't relevant, but because relevant is uncomfortable. And uncomfortable, for a mind that has learned to manage everything through analysis, is easier to exit than to sit with. The fact that you're still here tells me something about you. It tells me you're not looking for a quick fix. You're not here for the 3 steps or the morning routine or the hack that finally makes everything click. That's different, and it matters more than you might think. If this channel is the kind of place you want to keep coming back to, go ahead and subscribe. Not because of the number, but because what we're building here is a body of work for people who are done with surface level answers, people who are tired of content that makes them feel temporarily better without actually changing anything, people who are ready to look at the harder stuff and sit with it long enough for it to actually do something. There's a lot more coming. And the next videos are going to go even deeper into the territory we've been covering today. The psychology underneath the psychology, the patterns beneath the patterns, the things that keep intelligent, reflective, self-aware people stuck in ways that none of the standard frameworks ever quite explain. But before I close this out, I want to ask you something. And I want you to actually think about it rather than letting it pass like background noise. What is the one thing you already understand about yourself that you have been using as a reason not to move? Not a vague thing, a specific one. The pattern you've named so many times it's lost its power to shock you. The insight that used to feel like a breakthrough and now just feels like furniture in a room you've stopped noticing. Drop it in the comments. Not to process it, not to get advice, not to perform self-awareness for strangers on the internet. Just to say it out loud to someone other than yourself. Because sometimes the simple act of naming it outside your own head, without the safety net of your own internal narrative, is the first real move. The first moment the thought stops being yours alone and becomes something you're actually accountable to. And that's exactly what we've been talking about this entire time. The move. The small, imperfect, uncomfortable, no guarantee move that insight alone can never make for you. Which brings me to where this has been going all along. If you've made it this far into this video with me, I want to take a second to say something directly. Most people don't make it here. They click away in the first few minutes. Not because the content wasn't relevant, but because relevant is uncomfortable. And uncomfortable, for a mind that has learned to manage everything through analysis, is easier to exit than to sit with. The fact that you're still here tells me something about you. It tells me you're not looking for a quick fix. You're not here for the 3 steps or the morning routine or the hack that finally makes everything click. That's different, and it matters more than you might think. If this channel is the kind of place you want to keep coming back to, go ahead and subscribe. Not because of the number, but because what we're building here is a body of work for people who are done with surface level answers, people who are tired of content that makes them feel temporarily better without actually changing anything, people who are ready to look at the harder stuff and sit with it long enough for it to actually do something. There's a lot more coming. And the next videos are going to go even deeper into the territory we've been covering today. The psychology underneath the psychology, the patterns beneath the patterns, the things that keep intelligent, reflective, self-aware people stuck in ways that none of the standard frameworks ever quite explain. But before I close this out, I want to ask you something. And I want you to actually think about it rather than letting it pass like background noise. What is the one thing you already understand about yourself that you have been using as a reason not to move? Not a vague thing, a specific one. The pattern you've named so many times it's lost its power to shock you. The insight that used to feel like a breakthrough and now just feels like furniture in a room you've stopped noticing. Drop it in the comments. Not to process it, not to get advice, not to perform self-awareness for strangers on the internet. Just to say it out loud to someone other than yourself. Because sometimes the simple act of naming it outside your own head, without the safety net of your own internal narrative, is the first real move. The first moment the thought stops being yours alone and becomes something you're actually accountable to. And that's exactly what we've been talking about this entire time. The move. The small, imperfect, uncomfortable, no guarantee move that insight alone can never make for you. Which brings me to where this has been going all along.